So good morning, everybody. A warm welcome to you all who've joined us this morning. My name is Mark Nolan, account manager here at INNOVATE. Also joining us this morning is Vincent Liffey from Microsoft. Hi, Vincent, and Stephen Harper from Arrow. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping mentions. I'd encourage you to submit any questions you have in the chat window throughout our webinar. We will address those questions at the end, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you over the next 24 hours. Feel free to share that with your colleagues. Our aim is to have a 30-minute presentation followed by questions and answers at the end. Most of you know who we are here at INNOVATE, but for those less familiar, we are a leading managed IT and service provider. We provide proactive managed service solutions for our clients that are based throughout the island of Ireland and across a number of different sectors. We're a cloud first, but not always cloud. And what I mean by that is we believe in the power of cloud and the benefit it brings to organizations, but we do take a customer-centric approach. So working out what the limitations are, what they are looking to achieve, and we provide solutions that best fit their requirements. We package our solutions as a monthly operating cost for our clients. This helps with capital expenditure upfront. We get to know your business and we give the most cost-effective and efficient means to drive your business. The Azure migration path can be complex for some. However, with engagement and focus, we at INNOVATE will minimize any complexity, leveraging our experience and that of our excellent Microsoft channel. So with that in mind, I want to introduce Stephen Harper from Arrow, who will guide us through our presentation. So good morning, Stephen.
Yes, hi, good morning, everybody. Hope you're all okay today. So as Mark just explained, I think today's session, we're going to look at some of the topics we're just showing here on the screen. So understanding some of the motions behind why modernize, why migrate to Azure. And then we'll finish off with Mark talking us through some of the offers and, such like to wrap up the session. So let's start off with a few questions, if that's okay with you, Mark, and then we'll slide through, go from there.
Perfect. Yeah. So look, why do you think really that more and more customers are moving towards cloud services?
So what I'll do here is let's explore some of these topics in a little bit more detail and some of those use cases around them, if that's all right with you. So just here, I'm just showing a few of the topics, but as I said, let's talk through one or two. So in today's world, we do see a number of different use cases, and they're contributing towards either a full migration public cloud or a hybrid migration, so i.e. extending your data center into public cloud. Typically, customers are looking at this for multiple, different reasons. So firstly, for example, costs of hosting and running on-premise data centers have risen dramatically. These costs are going up all the time. And to that point, these costs have become quite unpredictable. So customers are looking to either save costs by reducing, for example, the number of data centers they have, or by actually migrating into the cloud. Secondly, customers are finding it hard to also predict growth and predict that future capacity need. So the way in which businesses operate today, we're thinking about the speed of change to stay competitive. These are all key factors that we see. So at the end of the day, if we look at maybe that investment angle as well, the procurement life cycles, all of those take time and extra money, which if you're, for example, running a project and you need to know rather quickly, whether it's going to work for you, i.e., whether you stand something up and need to fail fast. This is where public cloud can really fit in, either in a hybrid motion or simply by spinning this up directly into public cloud. So we're also seeing a number of other changes as well that's impacting. So for example, a change in this landscape is really also coming from the risk of cybersecurity. And although today's workshop isn't really about cyber, we are seeing that as a top factor nowadays that most leaders are talking about. So, for example, here, cyber insurance companies, the whole industry actually is changing. And they're starting to now mandate that companies don't just fill in paperwork, they actually take these risks more seriously. So some of the insurance providers I've been working with recently, they've been implementing tools that, really hone in and ask the companies that's, wanting to get cyber insurance to make sure all these measures are in place. So it's no longer just this sort of tick box exercise. Within public cloud as well, within what we're doing here, we're also, when we think about the risks, Microsoft have what we call a shared responsibility model. So, i.e., depending upon where we land in public cloud, some of those risks are with Microsoft and some are with us. So, in your on-premise environment, obviously you've got to cater for the risks around, access to your data center, security, and everything else. But we do share that in public cloud, so that does help in these circumstances as well. So I thought let's just, probably park that there without going into too many of these scenarios. I know we'll touch on one or two more in a while, if that's okay.
Sure. Look, I know speaking to customers all the time, some can be a little bit apprehensive about migrating data to cloud. Do they need to be concerned?
Well, if there's one thing the last few years has taught us is that data really is like the lifeblood of business today. We all need data to operate. So the one thing that we've really observed here is that no business is immune to these sudden changes. Therefore, navigating this change in how we operate today does require a new level of agility that we've not necessarily seen in previous years. And this is simply to deal with these sudden changes. So what we've observed really is that those organizations that can accelerate innovation and embrace their data as a more of a strategic asset have fared better over the last few years. They've both established the culture and the capabilities needed to be more agile, enabling them to more anticipate and predict things like disruptions and to pivot as their business needs. So the stakes are quite high, and as an organization grows, its prospects ultimately depend on the data at the core of it. So doing this isn't that easy, given the reality of today's data, the volume, variety, and the data. We're seeing exponential growth in this area. So today, when we look at this, we generate data far quicker than we're actually able to understand it. So in fact, there's reports out there by IDC, and they predict by something like 2025, we're going to see something like 175 zettabytes of data out there. And to put that in some like real perspective, if you were to put that on Blu-rays, who thought Blu-rays would be a topic for today, you could line them up to the moon and back, and that's about how much data we're talking about, humongous amounts. However, with the right people, the right processes, and with the right capabilities in place, I think there's a couple of questions here I'd like to ask is, ask yourselves, what data do I have? Is it trustworthy data? Are people getting the data they need on time, to make the right decisions? Are they getting it fast enough? And when we think about this data, are we handling it in a site compliant way? So I think just moving on, if we can, from probably back to the theme here of, well, what are the motions to go to public cloud? We see, well, there's two paths we should be talking about here: migration and modernization. So if we're not aware what the differences are, let me just explain those quickly. So cloud migration, i.e. is the process of moving your apps, your infrastructure and data from one location, often in a private data center or a colo or something like that, into your cloud provider's infrastructure. So to give you an example of this, migrating on-premise like a physical machine or virtual machines, that would be a case of moving from that infrastructure to what we call infrastructure as a service within Microsoft Azure. So for customers who maybe have SQL Server, this would also mean migrating those workloads into infrastructure as a service, or we could look at maybe a different topic of modernizing in a minute, where we might migrate that to a platform as a service. So the main benefits here is really about driving and reducing things like IT costs, enhancing security and resilience, but also giving you that elastic on-demand scale that you get with public cloud. Whereas modernization, well, that's really the process of sometimes updating our legacy applications for new computing approaches, including newer application frameworks and use of things like cloud native technologies. As I mentioned just now, this could be done by using platform as service or PaaS, low code applications, containers, and other technologies like that we have available to us within the Microsoft landscape, within Microsoft Azure. This would also include for SQL things like a SQL database or SQL managed instances as well. So these key benefits really do include things like app innovation, agility, the ability to more quickly develop and fail fast, as well as keep up with that velocity and looking at a better way of optimizing our costs. Okay.
Very good. Look, speaking to customers all the time as well, a lot of people seem to be embracing cloud just to facilitate that work from home model. Are there other considerations out there, Stephen, that customers need to be mindful of?
Sure. Yeah. So I mentioned a couple of those triggers just now, but obviously there's a lot more we could be highlighting. So let me just go through a couple of them quite briefly, if that's all right. So probably looking at one of those is overcoming cash flow challenges. So for example, if you're having to buy hardware on premise, obviously it's a procurement cycle and you're committing a lot of cash out of your CapEx budget. Public cloud, we're operating on OpEx, so it means say you can stand up something quick and tear it down, and obviously these costs stop when you tear it down. So next up, we've already mentioned cybersecurity threats, and obviously there is a level of shared responsibility that you get within public cloud. So just to throw a bit more light on that, if you move your infrastructure to Azure as virtual machines, Microsoft looks after the hypervisor layer, so you don't need to worry about all those elements of the hypervisor and of the hardware. You just need to worry about keeping your virtual machine secure, up to date, and how you connect to them, for example. We're also seeing things like scarce IT budgets and resources. i.e., customers tend to want to like free up IT resources to invest in other parts of the business. So again, that slightly relates to, both human scaling and slight capital budgets being released as well to do other things. I've already mentioned we have that ability as well to, surge, burst on demand. So you may have a seasonal business, you may have something, similar like that. Maybe you're doing a campaign promotion. This is where you have the ability to do a hybrid or just, move these things into public cloud and do them on a as needs and on demand basis. Other things we see as well are things like contract expiries for data centers. So, many customers we speak to, at some point you might need to consider, when that contract is expiring, and because everybody is putting out their costs, that's a really good time in advance of that contract expiry to look at public cloud. And obviously, when we look at that, we can look at the ROIs, business cases, and obviously INNOVATE can help with that. Other things in there that I've seen as well is that some data center businesses, have gone out of service almost. So again, there's another trigger. Obviously, that one's a lot more urgent when it does happen, but do consider all these things.
Sure, and I think underlying infrastructure is important, and that core infrastructure piece, having that up to date is important, and connectivity as well. What we would find is the other consideration that we have to ensure that that's available, and some people will also consider failover technology as well to deliver a rich Azure experience for customers. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah. So I think as part of this topic, we should also be talking about, BCDR and why that's important, how that can help, and maybe the differences between that and HA, so high availability. So I think let's take this first topic of business continuity and disaster recovery. So Microsoft has a solution around this. What it does for us, it can replicate asynchronous processes. This really has, the expectation of limited data loss during any type of recovery time, but let's delve into this a little bit more. So what BCDR really does matter, because it's inevitable disruptions to hardware will happen. You'll get bugs, software bugs, there might be human error. It's quite simply, you might get hardware failure. So how you prepare and mitigate for these interruptions as best as possible is really key. Interlinked with this topic, when we talk about BCP and disaster recovery, it's probably important also to establish what we mean by high availability, because obviously the two goes hand in hand, but they have a different set of metrics and reasons behind doing both. So high availability is where we have a design principle, i.e. a given application or workload, it's distributed across redundant infrastructure. That infrastructure could be physical, virtual. So the purpose is to provide that type of sufficient redundancy to give that application workload so it can tolerate a set level of failure on one or more nodes, depending upon the uptime that you require. Whereas disaster recovery represents the processes and tools required to resume those operations in the event of that total failure. So it relies both on backup and replication of asynchronous processes to mitigate against data loss and recovery. So unlike HA, disaster recovery doesn't take place solely within the application's architecture. Processes are asynchronous, whereas HA, sorry, is a synchronous process to achieve that real-time integrity during failover. So, or BCDR is therefore a process built on top of disaster recovery that limits data loss across, for example, in Azure, across multiple Azure regions, and it ensures that applications are able to continue to run during a major event. The way backup fits into this is that a recovery solution is for, you know, the applications, and that can no longer afford to interrupt during the restoration. So, you know, where backup comes in is we also need to go back to it, and we'll explain a little bit more in a minute.
Yeah, and I think the challenge with on-premise hardware, Stephen, has always been the actual restore. And I know there's lots of different tools, I suppose, available within Azure. How does it handle DR? And you know, we obviously expect a far more efficient backup and recovery time, or to get a backup and recovery time for customers with Azure.
Yeah, so that's correct. So Azure offers built-in backup recovery solutions. They are really easy to deploy. They're really cost-effective, secure, and scalable, providing you with an end-to-end business continuity solution. We also, well, Microsoft also supports via Azure protection of your existing data, where your solutions reside on premise, so not just data, but your virtual machines and that infrastructure that hosts it. So in the case of a disruption or accidental deletion or corruption of data, the technology here will enable you to recover your business services in a really timely and, more importantly, orchestrated manner. So with Azure, it is really easy to scale based on things like your backup storage. So users are able to reduce the cost of deploying, monitoring, patching, and scaling out the on-premise DR infrastructure by not having to build and maintain, for example, secondary data centers. So if your storage needs fluctuate, you can simply add or remove, managed resources in the Azure portal. Whereas hybrid environments, they often require heterogeneous storage, so some on-premise and some in the cloud. With Azure Backup, there's no cost for using it in the on-site on-premise storage devices. So Azure Backup automatically allocates and manages the backup storage. It uses a pay-as-you-go model, so you only pay for the storage you end up consuming. So this eliminates the need for you to really manage backup resources in the traditional way that you do today. Your backup is quite, very flexible. It has lots of different policies for you to optimize that storage. And obviously there are a number of ISVs or solution partners out there that offer a variety of pre-architected solutions that enable this value. I know your partner here today on the call, they'll be able to talk to you about some of those solutions that Mark has there within their portfolio. So Azure Backup also uses the underlying power and unlimited scale of public cloud to deliver both high availability with really low cost, low management overheads as well. So today, I've already mentioned one or two things, but there are really three broad areas to talk about. So what we'll do is we'll quickly dip into each one, just looking at the high level, if that's okay. So looking at our first strategy, and obviously they all depend upon what your business goals are and what your technology goals are. So the first item really here is protecting your on-premise applications and servers. So i.e. protect to Azure. So this feature allows us to choose what you want to replicate to another location. So this second strategy here is when you have this like on-premise setup, you could consider a move to Azure in the future, or you just want to save costs by running, by getting rid of another on-premise data center. Either way, so we can protect those workloads from on-premise to Azure. Also, in the other scenario we're discussing, if you're already in Azure, we're able to use those same services there, but in a different way to protect, for example, from where you've got them set up, maybe in one region to Azure to another region. Okay. And then thirdly, we can use SaaS backup capabilities. This capability is built into Azure, and this enables you to extend the on-premise like PaaS-based solutions you might have into Azure. So we'll look quickly at probably the scenario 1 and scenario 2 here, just for the sake of time. So resilience, it's not just about trying to avoid failure, but it's how we bounce back from it. So Azure can help you achieve that resilience at the level you need. So the Azure services provide you with the reliability that you need to meet your business requirements, including, there's lots of technologies here we could talk about, but premium storage. So it improves the availability for a single VM deployment. We could then be talking about high availability structures, including things like Azure availability sets and availability zones. And all of these are aimed and designed to support your business critical apps, which have very stringent like RTO and RPO, or recovery time and recovery point objective. We also have this concept of like paired regions in Azure that can help you further isolate your VMs while, say, we use, disaster recovery or let's give it its other name, Azure Site Recovery. Makes it easier for you to orchestrate and automate the recovery process in your DR plan. So just probably one item on that orchestration I've mentioned earlier. That actually allows you to go into very, very in-depth, pre-post scripts. What is it you want to do? How is it you want to fail over? What is it you want to look like? So all of these steps you can obviously put into play them back, and they really are a very powerful way of making sure that the outcome you desire, i.e. your services being failed over, they're up and running when you need them. However, there's like one thing common, no matter what how your deployment is set up, whether you're running your entire setup in a single region or whether you're spreading across zones, you'll most likely have obviously lots of data. So data that's stateful as well, i.e. something you need to preserve and go back to. So you do need to build a resilience plan against all these failures. And again, Azure services can help you achieve just that. So, for example, premium storage you mentioned just now gives us out of the box 99.5% availability in the case of a single VM that we set up. But if you want to achieve higher resilience than we can do, so we can look at using highly available structures, deploying our architecture and availability sets and availability zones, giving us up to 99.99% availability. So, we look at these higher numbers to achieve for our mission critical apps, as I mentioned just now, but none of these still recover your data from failures, and that's because all of these deployments are almost constantly syncing data. So if you do get data corruption, and if that does happen, we still need to go back in time, of course, to a few days or whenever it's relevant. So we still need to have a backed up version of that data. Hence, within Azure, we also have what we call Azure Backup, and that's where we can protect virtual machines and other services in Azure. It's not just virtual machines, as well as use that to protect on-premise if needs be.
Okay, a lot of insight there, Stephen. Is there we'll have a quick overview of this one?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So Tech to Azure. So here's why you'd want to protect to Azure instead of hosting, say, in another data center or location. Quite simple, if you are building another data center location, then you've got lots of hardware costs that you need to procure. You've got lots of other software as well that you need to probably procure to make sure it's able to sync. All of those things on its own are very expensive. On top of that, obviously, you need your network infrastructure, firewalls, everything else that you need to maintain that environment, such as power cooling. So all of those are what I'd call sunk costs. With Azure, I would say you're not paying for any of this until you use it. So you've got no, overheads to start with, in that procurement cycle. So, the other problems we've seen here is over the last couple of years is hardware is actually quite hard to get hold of. I know it's becoming easier to get hold of nowadays, but with Azure, you could be in it in 5 minutes time, building out what it is you need to build out. So, bear that in mind as well. Another feature that we talk about here is that you're not actually paying for these resources that we're protecting. So, i.e., if we're talking about disaster recovery, we're going to protect what we got, but that's simply going to copy that information and make it ready for a failover into Azure. So there is an element of paying for the storage, but you're not going to be paying for those expensive virtual machines. So you'll only pay for those things when you actually fail over and when you need to turn them on. So a little bit more about Azure Site Recovery. So as I said, this is really a technology, how we deploy it. I'll do a quick summary and not spend too long on that, if that's all right. So it's a concept of where we have an agent, we install an agent on the machines we want to protect in your data center. This agent connects securely out, so everything's all encrypted, and it's encrypted into your Azure environment. So i.e., that data cannot go anywhere else. It then replicates those changes almost, it's sort of real-time replication almost, up into public cloud. The process is asynchronous, so it means that the data is written to the backup resources in Azure, into the storage accounts in Azure. And it does this sequentially instead of simultaneously, which obviously this requires substantially less bandwidth as well. And the reason why we use this technology is because it can work over very long distances, i.e. between your data center and public cloud. So ASR itself, it uses virtual disks as the backup point So i.e. the virtual machines aren't being spun up. That's something that gets spun up when you invoke DR. So as I mentioned, they only come in when you invoke DR, and it mounts those virtual disks into those VMs. This really helps drive down the cost of running a DR service as well. So if you think it's just about the cost of that storage that you're holding there in Azure. And if you think the ASR agent, because it asynchronously replicates copies of this data and these disks to Azure, it really does make the failover really easy. So as I mentioned earlier, orchestration is a key point here. You could decide if, for example, your on-premise world looks like fixed IP, this, that, and the other. When you fail over to Azure, that orchestration layer will enable you to say, okay, change my IP, or do something that enables you to just simply click a button, fail over with that whole environment running. Very, very, very simple and very, very effective.
Perfect, Stephen. Look, a hugely broad topic, just really to give our participants, I suppose, a snippet. And I know that Microsoft are offering some offers at the moment, so maybe Vincent, you'd help us out with that. And look, Stephen, it's right. You should mention your Windows 2012 piece, because it's very relevant at the moment. Actually, apologies. Yeah, it's just to mention that we can at the moment, I suppose, with Windows 2012 Server is a hot topic for a lot of customers at the moment. The countdown is on. We think we're 10th of October is D-Day, but Azure does offer, I suppose, a safe space for existing 2012 server workloads. So it's definitely something that ties into this conversation as well. So sorry, Stephen, I might have cut you short there.
No, that's okay. So yeah, as you mentioned just now, there is a promotion Microsoft is running currently, which gives you ESU, or extended security updates, for Windows Server 2012 and SQL Server 2012 and R2 iterations of that. So you can bring those to Azure, and Microsoft currently aren't charging for any of the ESU updates. So the only other way of getting them until an updated announcement the other day was via an enterprise agreement if you're on premise. However, there may be a change in the future to that. But do really consider this, because free ESU updates, that's got to be a money saver in my mind. Another reason to move these workloads to Azure.
Very good, very good. Vincent, are you happy just to take us through just the current offer that's available from Microsoft?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I suppose Stephen been going through. Now is a good time to, I suppose, consider a migration to Azure with 2012 in particular going end of support in the next few weeks. And there's the ESU offer, but there's also an offer called Azure Credit Offer for new customers into Azure, and also for those that are already there that are adding an additional workload into Azure, where we can basically provide a 1 to 10 return on investment for the customer. So, for example, if you are projected to spend an extra $1,000 a month or a new $1,000 a month on a migration to Azure, we can give you $1,200, for example, of Azure credit as you start that migration. I suppose it eases the pain of the migration costs at the start, but that extends. It's not limited to that. So, for example, if your projected spend is going to be much larger than that, we can also apply for the same credit. And I've been very successful with this motion for in the start of the financial year, and I've gotten Azure credit amounts in tens of thousands for certain customers that have large projected workloads. So I would ask every customer that's out there to consider that, and I would also ask them to consider, taking the next steps, which may be just having maybe an assessment of your environment, see what you can consider moving to Azure, because you can start off small in Azure, particularly with backup. BCDR is a key motion for those of you that have, might have a audit coming up or something like that, if you're not 100% happy with your backup infrastructure. BCDR is a key, I suppose, product in the Microsoft set, and it can be set up in a matter of moments to get your workloads protected into Azure and to have them in an alternate location. So I work obviously very closely with INNOVATE and the guys now to make these customer journeys as easy as possible. So if anybody has any questions or anything like that following this call, you can reach out to the guys. Obviously, we can also reach out directly to me as a customer if you wish, and I can assist you as best I can. So, yeah, the Azure credit offer is a key motion for us into FY24. And those of you that may be familiar with it from a past life, it was always a kind of an enterprise motion, but it's now made available in CSP through direct and indirect partners. So I'm very keen to promote it, to give customers that little step up on the ladder into Azure as they start their IT modernization journey. So yeah, that's all I want to say. So Mark, thanks very much, and thank you all for joining this morning. It's great to have such high numbers attending, and thanks Stephen for the content.
Thanks, Vincent. Thanks, Stephen. And look, thanks to participants for your attention. Your INNOVATE account manager will be in touch over the next couple of days anyway. And look, really just to say, I suppose I just don't see any questions there. That's okay. Your INNOVATE account manager will be in touch. And look, thanks again, Stephen, and thanks again, Vincent, and to everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.